In today's episode, we're diving into the most horrifying shark attacks ever recorded. From a hungry shark destroying a $1 million yacht, ending multiple people's lives, to a dumb teen ignoring a shark warning for a video. Let's begin with the first story. April 11, 2022 was humid and gray off the southern coast of Bali. The tide was steady, the surf gentle, and visibility already dropping as morning rain clouds built along the horizon. Most locals stayed out of the water on days like that, especially near the deeper reef shelves where currents shift and predators roam. But to 30-year-old Derek Wincombe, it was perfect. He'd flown in from California the week before, chasing adventure on a 6-month break from his job in web development. Friends back home followed his every move online. Clips of him freediving in cenotes, balancing on narrow ridge trails, grilling seafood on remote beaches. The next post was supposed to be his best yet, filmed alone in murky water, surrounded by bait. Derek was the kind of person who craved intensity. He wasn't reckless in the way people usually meant. He researched gear, read travel advisories, and talked to locals. But once he felt confident, he didn't hesitate. He thrived on doing what others wouldn't, hiking into active volcano zones, spearfishing without a partner, diving into dark water for the rush of it. Friends called him bold. His parents called him stubborn. Derek called it living. The waters off southern Bali are beautiful but dangerous in ways that don't always show on the surface. Beneath the bright shallows lie drop-offs that plunge hundreds of feet, where tiger sharks, oceanic whitetips, and other predators roam. Rainfall brings silt and runoff from inland, reducing visibility to just a few feet. And when tourists chum the water, cutting baitfish to lure in bigger species for photos or sport, it blurs the line between curiosity and risk. Locals knew better. Derek didn't listen. Derek rented gear from a local dive shack and set out alone just after 9 a.m., a short scooter ride from his guest house. Locals who saw him off didn't say much, just exchanged looks. Most fishermen avoided solo spearfishing runs, especially in murky conditions. It wasn't just the reduced visibility, it was what reduced visibility attracted. Derek, however, was undeterred. He strapped on his GoPro, secured his spear gun, and paddled out with a mesh bag of chopped baitfish dangling from his hip, chum he planned to use to draw in action for the camera. The reef drop-off where Derek chose to dive was known for tiger sharks and oceanic whitetips. These aren't the slow gliding shadows seen from boats, they're bold, curious apex predators, drawn in by movement, scent, and the vibrations of a wounded fish. Oceanic whitetips in particular have a history of aggressive behavior toward isolated swimmers, especially when bait is in the water. They hunt high in the water column and are known to circle, bump, and strike. Tiger sharks, sometimes called the garbage cans of the sea, are even less discriminating. At over 14 feet long, they can deliver over 1,300 pounds of bite force and often mistake thrashing limbs for prey. In the open ocean, alone and chumming, Derek was mimicking the very things those sharks were designed to find. Derek Wincombe entered the water alone, spear gun in hand, off a remote reef shelf south of Bali. He'd ignored local warnings, skipped hiring a guide, and dragged a pouch of cut bait behind him for dramatic underwater footage. At first, things seemed quiet. Fish darted past, the water glowed green in the filtered light. But visibility dropped fast. As he descended, shadows began to flicker. A tiger shark appeared first, circling slowly. Then another form moved below, smaller, quicker. Derek steadied his grip. The first hit came without warning, a shoulder check that knocked the spear gun loose. Then the real strike followed. Jaws clamped onto his leg, dragging him into a spiral of blood and sand. He kicked, thrashed, tried to reach for the surface, but the current and weight of the animal overpowered him completely. When he failed to return, a search party found only torn wetsuit scraps and a broken spear gun floating near the reef. Derek's body was never recovered. No footage survived, no witnesses saw what happened. Just a series of poor choices in the wrong place. Diving alone, chumming the water, ignoring every warning. And an ocean that doesn't give second chances. When Derek failed to check out of his guest house, the host alerted a local dive shack who confirmed he'd gone out alone that morning and hadn't returned. A small search launched at dawn turned up only his broken spear gun, a torn piece of wetsuit, and his GoPro. Experts reviewing the footage concluded a large shark, likely a tiger or oceanic whitetip, had struck fast and fatally. With no flotation, no dive partner, and no backup, Derek never had a chance. Local fishermen, though saddened, weren't surprised. Shark activity in that reef was common, especially during the rainy season when runoff clouded the water and bait fish gathered. Warning signs were posted, and guides regularly cautioned against solo spearfishing or chumming. Derek's family flew in to collect his belongings, but no remains were ever found. Back in California, friends held a beach memorial placing flowers beside a screenshot from his last trip. Derek had been bold, curious, and thrill-seeking, but he'd ignored every rule. Diving alone, baiting predators, entering murky waters without support. They weren't the kind of mistakes experienced divers make, just the kind you don't get to make twice. July 15, 2010 dawned bright and clear over the waters of Jupiter, Florida. The air was warm with the scent of salt and the ocean stretched out in an endless expanse of deep blue. Gentle waves lapped against the shore as early morning beachgoers staked out their spots, spreading towels and planting umbrellas in the sand. Just offshore, fishing boats bobbed in the distance, and seabirds wheeled overhead, scanning for their morning meal. None of them could have imagined that a few miles away, beneath the surface of the calm waters, something ancient and lethal was watching. Rebecca Hayes, 32, had always been drawn to the ocean. Growing up in coastal Maine, she spent her childhood exploring tide pools, braving frigid Atlantic waters, and competing in long-distance swimming events. Her passion for the sea led her to the University of Miami, where she earned a degree in marine biology in 2000. But for Rebecca, studying the ocean wasn't enough. She needed to be in it, surrounded by the water she loved. An accomplished open water swimmer, she competed in endurance races worldwide, pushing her body to its limits. Her friends admired her fearless nature, her relentless determination. Some, however, worried that she was a little too confident when it came to the risks of the open ocean. That morning, she prepared for another long-distance swim, a routine training session in familiar waters. It was just another day, another challenge. But no amount of experience could account for what lurked unseen beneath the waves. The great white shark is one of the ocean's most fearsome predators, a species that has roamed Earth's waters for over 400 million years. Growing over 20 feet long and weighing as much as 5,000 pounds, these sharks possess an almost unmatched predatory efficiency. Their torpedo-shaped bodies allow them to accelerate with terrifying speed, while their serrated 3-inch-long teeth can shear through flesh and bone with devastating force. Despite their reputation, fatal great white attacks on humans are relatively rare. Most encounters are believed to be cases of mistaken identity, where a shark confuses a swimmer or surfer for its usual prey, seals or sea lions. When a great white does attack, however, the results are often catastrophic. For experienced swimmers like Rebecca, the possibility of encountering a shark was always in the back of her mind, but it was not enough to deter her. Confident in her abilities and aware of the precautions taken during open water training, she approached the ocean with the same fearless determination that had defined her career. That morning, she set out just after sunrise, accompanied by her longtime friend and training partner, 28-year-old Michael Torres. He piloted the support boat alongside her, maintaining a steady pace as she glided through the water. Conditions were near perfect. Calm seas, clear skies, and the water temperatures hovering at a comfortable 78 degrees. By 8:17 a.m., Rebecca had reached the planned training zone 3 miles offshore. The water's clarity extended nearly 100 feet in all directions, offering an unobstructed view of the vast empty blue. Michael followed her progress from the boat, keeping a careful eye on her steady strokes as she powered through the waves. For 30 minutes, everything was routine. Then, at 8:47 a.m., something shifted. A dark shape emerged from the depths, an immense, shadowy figure moving with the eerie silence of an apex predator. Without warning, the water beneath Rebecca erupted. The 18-foot great white struck with explosive force, launching Rebecca partially out of the water. The impact alone was enough to break ribs and puncture organs. Before she could react, before she could even register what had happened, the shark's massive jaws clamped down. Michael saw it all from the boat. One moment Rebecca was swimming, the next she was airborne. Her body twisted at an unnatural angle as the shark's teeth sank into her torso. The force of the bite was beyond comprehension. Nearly 4,000 pounds per square inch, more than enough to sever limbs and crush bone. The water turned red in an instant. Rebecca's scream was brief, a single sharp cry swallowed by the ocean. The shark, displaying its natural feeding instincts, began thrashing its head side to side, ripping through flesh and muscle. Within seconds, Rebecca was gone. Michael could only watch as the great white disappeared beneath the surface, dragging what remained of his friend into the deep. The Coast Guard arrived at 9:22 a.m., responding to Michael's frantic distress call. A search was launched, but the only trace of Rebecca ever recovered was her torn wetsuit and a single swim fin floating near the attack site. For 3 days, teams scoured the waters, though by the second day the mission had shifted from a rescue effort to a recovery operation. After obtaining Rebecca's information from Michael, authorities contacted her parents, Robert and Linda Hayes, at their home in Maine. The call came as a shock. Rebecca had swum in open waters for years, and the idea that she was simply gone felt impossible. Within hours, they were on a flight to Florida, desperate for answers. At the marina, they watched each search boat return, hoping for any sign of their daughter. Volunteers joined the efforts, combing the shoreline for debris, while Rebecca's friends from the open water swimming community called in, offering support. But with each passing day, the weight of reality settled heavier. She wasn't coming back. On July 19th, commercial fisherman Frank Martinez and his crew were out on the water 20 miles south of the attack site when something caught his attention. A massive great white shark, its sleek body cutting effortlessly through the waves, swam close to the boat. As it passed, Martinez noticed a deep, jagged scar running along its left gill slit, a distinctive marking he had heard about just days earlier. Local authorities had put out a call to fishermen, dive operators, and boat captains in the area, alerting them to be on the lookout for a large great white with a unique scarring pattern. The description matched reports given by Michael Torres, who had seen the unique pattern on the shark during the attack. Martinez immediately contacted authorities, reporting the sighting and giving precise coordinates before the shark disappeared into deeper waters. Marine officials already monitoring the area deployed tracking teams using aerial surveillance and patrol boats. Over the next 2 days, they followed the shark's movements, eventually locating it near a deep-water shelf where large predators often hunt. Believing this was the same shark responsible for Rebecca's death, they made the decision to capture and examine it. When the shark was dissected, what they found left no doubt. Inside its stomach were human remains, fragments of bone, and a shredded section of Rebecca's wetsuit. Michael, the sole witness to Rebecca's death, was deeply shaken and withdrew from open water swimming. In the aftermath, he abandoned the sport entirely, unable to return to the water without remembering what had happened. Her family was devastated. The loss of their daughter left a void that could never be filled, and in the months that followed, they struggled to come to terms with the horrific way she had died. The ocean, once a place of adventure and joy for Rebecca, became something they could no longer look at without pain. It was a warm summer evening in 1935, and the Catalina Channel stretched out like a darkened sheet of glass beneath the fading light. The last streaks of orange clung to the horizon as Dr. Alfred Wilkes and his son Barney prepared to cross the 20-mile expanse from San Pedro to Santa Catalina Island. Their boat, a modest wooden vessel, bobbed gently at the dock, its weathered hull reflecting in the water's surface. Dr. Alfred, a man of 58, had just finished his shift at George's Street Receiving Hospital in Los Angeles, where he had worked long hours tending to the injured and sick. His son, 23-year-old Barney, had traveled from Avalon to meet him. The trip was supposed to be a simple one, a routine passage across waters they had navigated before. Dr. Alfred gave the pull start rope a firm yank. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then fell silent. He tried again, this time with more force. The motor choked before finally roaring to life, the vibrations rattling through the wooden frame. He eased the throttle forward and the boat sliced through the water, leaving the lights of the harbor to fade into the growing darkness. The air carried the sharp scent of salt, and the rhythmic churning of the waves filled the silence between them. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their distant cries swallowed by the vast emptiness. In the stillness of the open ocean, they were utterly alone. Halfway through their journey, the steady hum of the engine changed. A few erratic sputters, a choking cough, then silence. The boat drifted, rocking gently in the quiet. Dr. Alfred and Barney exchanged a look of concern. The fuel tank was empty. Dr. Alfred reached for the pull start, yanking it again and again. Nothing. The boat was dead in the water. They had been so focused on setting off that day that they had neglected to check the fuel. Their only option now was to wait and hope for a passing vessel. Then came the explosion, a sharp, deafening crack from the stern. Flames erupted in a sudden burst of orange, licking hungrily at the wooden frame. The blast had ripped through the engine casing, sending shards of metal into the hull. Water gushed in through the ruptured planks, filling the boat faster than they could bail it out. Dr. Alfred's voice was calm but firm. They had no choice. They had to abandon the vessel. Barney climbed onto the gunwale, took a steadying breath, and leapt into the water. Dr. Alfred followed, plunging into the cold, endless black. They surfaced, gasping, and watched as their boat shuddered and tipped before slipping beneath the waves. For hours they clung to the overturned hull, their bodies growing numb in the frigid water. The night was relentless, the wind slicing through their drenched clothes. The salt stung their skin and fatigue gnawed at their limbs. The horizon remained empty. No lights, no passing ships. Only the vast expanse of the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. Eventually, Dr. Alfred's grip began to weaken. His fingers, stiff and trembling, threatened to slip from the smooth wood. Barney shifted, reaching out just in time to grasp his father's wrist as he slid downward. He braced himself, pulling him up. It was clear that their strength was fading, and just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, the water beneath them stirred, a sudden violent shift. Then a shark emerged, striking directly with its jaws gaping before clamping down on Dr. Alfred's ankle. The force wrenched him backward. Barney heaved with all his strength, dragging his father onto the overturned boat just as the shark vanished into the abyss. The water swirled red, staining the sea with a deepening cloud of blood. Dr. Alfred lay sprawled across the hull, his breaths ragged. His ankle was torn, the flesh shredded down to the bone. The sea was no longer empty. Shapes moved beneath them, shadows slicing through the water, circling. The scent of blood had drawn them. The ocean's silence was broken by the sound of water breaking, the dull slap of fins, the gliding of unseen predators. Barney's pulse pounded as he gripped his father's arm. More sharks were coming. Then the second attack. A sudden surge, a splash. Barney turned just in time to see his father slip from the boat. The water erupted. A gaping mouth lined with rows of serrated teeth broke the surface. The shark's head, sleek and pale beneath the morning sun, lunged. Barney lunged too, his fingers grasping for his father's hand. For a moment he had him. Then another surge. Dr. Alfred disappeared beneath the thrashing waves. Barney scrambled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The water frothed with movement. The sharks had descended upon their prey, tearing through the sea with frantic energy. A sharp, searing pain ripped through Barney's leg. He cried out, kicking violently. A set of powerful jaws had latched onto his ankle, dragging him downward. He struck out, his fist connecting with the creature's snout. A desperate blow. The grip loosened. The shark veered off, leaving behind a trail of crimson in the water. Barney gasped for air, his hands fumbling to regain his hold on the overturned boat. His breath came in short, desperate bursts. His leg throbbed, the water around him darkening with fresh blood. Then the blaring horn of a Perseneer named Excellent cut through the chaos. The vessel loomed in the distance, its hull slicing through the turbulent sea. At the sight of the ship, the sharks disappeared beneath the waves as swiftly as they had arrived. The crew moved fast, scanning the water as they approached. Just a few feet away from Barney, they spotted Dr. Alfred's lifeless body, partially submerged and drifting in the blood-stained waves. They lowered a rope ladder over the side, and strong hands reached down, pulling both Barney and his father aboard. On deck, Barney gasped for breath, his mind still reeling from the attack. Crew members listened as he recounted their harrowing ordeal before rushing him to Santa Catalina Island Hospital. There, doctors worked swiftly to treat Barney's injuries, closing the puncture wounds on his ankle. Meanwhile, his father remained unresponsive and was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. Despite their efforts, Dr. Alfred was pronounced dead. An autopsy later confirmed that he had drowned, his lungs filled with seawater before the sharks ever reached him. In the days that followed, the Coast Guard conducted an extensive search, scanning the waters between Santa Catalina Island and the mainland. They discovered the wreckage of the boat drifting miles from the attack site. Its stern and engine charred, the damage unmistakable. Investigators traced the explosion to a mechanical failure, likely caused by a leaking fuel line igniting when Dr. Alfred attempted to restart the engine. As for the shark attack, the species responsible remains a mystery. Some experts suggest a great white or a mako, while others believe it could have been a deep-water predator, drawn closer to shore by changing ocean currents. The Catalina Channel's dark new reputation hung over the waters, a chilling reminder that no one was truly safe, not even a father and son. It was May 12, 2023 when Melissa Carpenter zipped up her wetsuit and stepped into the morning that would change everything. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, casting gold across the Pacific, and the shoreline at Torrey Pines was unusually still. The kind of stillness that hums in your chest and makes you wonder if something's waiting just beneath the surface. The tide pulled in slow, steady breaths, and somewhere far off a seagull cried. It should have felt peaceful, but peace can be deceptive. Melissa had driven to the beach before dawn, gripping the steering wheel tighter than she needed to. The crash had taken so much, her ability to walk unaided, her career momentum, her sense of control. Recovery had been slow and brutal. 8 months of physical therapy, weekends relearning how to sit, how to stand, how to trust her body again. Surfing wasn't just a bucket list whim, it was the final threshold. If she could ride a wave even once, maybe she could finally leave the trauma behind. She was the kind of person who did everything quietly but with purpose. A woman who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten notes, and left groceries on doorsteps without signing her name. Her apartment overflowed with greenery and watercolor paintings of birds and tide pools. Before the accident, she volunteered at the animal shelter and spent weekends sketching by the bluffs. Friends called her gentle. Her therapist called her resilient. Melissa didn't see herself as either. She just knew she didn't want fear to dictate her life anymore. The decision to try surfing had come in a moment of instinct, spontaneous but strangely certain. The ocean had always represented something sacred to her. Not adventure, but rhythm. Not adrenaline, but surrender. This morning, with the sun rising and the beach mostly empty, she believed she could claim a small piece of herself back. By 7:30 a.m., she was standing barefoot in the sand, staring at the waves like they might speak first. Jake Mendoza, her instructor, waved from down the beach. He was easygoing, confident, and already setting up 2 surfboards. He'd been briefed about Melissa's history and promised they'd take it slow. Just fundamentals, safety first. They started with warm-ups on the beach. Jake walked her through the basic posture, the motion of paddling, the importance of knowing how to fall. Melissa practiced the pop-up again and again, stumbling on the soft sand, then correcting herself. Her movements weren't graceful, but there was progress in each try. Jake nodded. She was ready. By 8:30, they were waist-deep in the water, and Melissa felt the first true flicker of doubt. The sea, cool and vast, swallowed her lower half. The water was only 65 degrees, but it felt colder, sharper. As she floated over a small breaker, her breath hitched. The sensation was too familiar, floating, weightless, uncertain. She remembered the moment the car spun, the way gravity had vanished, the silence before impact. Jake was beside her. He tapped the nose of her board and reminded her to breathe, to let her board hold her, to remember she was in control. Melissa nodded. She pressed down with her palms and adjusted her position, letting the board carry her out past the turbulence. The waves calmed, the sky opened wider, and for a moment it felt like progress. But peace never stays. By 9:45 a.m., they had moved farther out, about 50 yards from shore. The waves had picked up slightly, gentle rolling swells that lifted Melissa's board with grace. From the beach, the lifeguard tower stood like a distant watchman, the figures of sunbathers and early swimmers scattered across the coastline. The world looked soft from out here, almost unreal. Jake scanned the water. He saw a clean wave rising in the distance and pointed to it. Not too fast, not too steep. He told Melissa to paddle. She did. The board surged forward beneath her. She pressed her palms flat, brought one knee forward, then stood. For 3 seconds, just 3, she balanced atop the wave, arms outstretched, mouth open in a breathless smile. That was when the water beneath her erupted. A massive force collided with the underside of her board, lifting it violently and throwing her clear into the air. Melissa slammed into the sea with a hard splash, her breath vanishing on impact. She came up gasping, eyes wide, limbs flailing. Jake was already paddling toward her, assuming she had wiped out. Then he saw it. The water just beyond her shifted in a way that wasn't natural. A shadow, thick and fast, cut through the swell. It turned, curved, disappeared beneath her. Then the dorsal fin surfaced. The shark was enormous, nearly 11 feet long, dark gray and heavy-bodied. A mature female bull shark. Though neither Melissa nor Jake had time to consider species, they only saw the size, the speed, and the sickening stillness that followed each movement. The board had drifted 6 feet away. Melissa was treading water, disoriented. Jake yelled for her to get back on it, loud, sharp, insistent. She reached for the board. The shark moved again. It circled once, its dorsal fin cutting a clean arc across the surface. Nearby surfers had started paddling hard for shore, yelling warnings. From the lifeguard tower, a whistle screamed across the waves. But it was too late. The second strike came from the side, fast and absolute. The shark clamped down on Melissa's right thigh just above the knee and pulled her under in a red bloom. Jake reached the spot seconds later. There was nothing but froth and blood. Then she surfaced screaming. Her leg was mangled, muscle torn wide open, and the water around her bloomed crimson. Jake grabbed her under the arms and hauled her half onto his board. His lips were pale, his limbs shaking. Blood poured in pulsing waves from the wound. She was alive, but not for long. Lifeguards were already in motion. One sprinted from the tower while another paddled toward them on a rescue board. From shore, scattered onlookers were now standing frozen, their gazes locked on the commotion unfolding in the surf. The shark returned. Its fin rose again, carving straight toward them. Jake didn't hesitate. He pushed Melissa onto the rescue board as the lifeguard reached them. Then he turned, placing himself between her and the advancing shape. The shark struck his board hard, snapping it near the tail. The impact sent him tumbling sideways into the water. As Jake surfaced, he saw the lifeguard paddling fast, Melissa clinging weakly to the rescue handles. Jake grabbed the broken half of his board and thrashed it against the water, trying to create noise and confusion. It worked. The shark veered and circled him briefly, then vanished below. He swam hard for shore. When they reached the beach, Melissa was ghost pale. Her pulse flickered beneath her skin, shallow and fast. Lifeguards hauled her onto the sand and began CPR immediately. A crowd gathered in stunned silence, drawn by the chaos but unsure what they were witnessing. Jake collapsed beside her, covered in salt and blood, breath rasping from his lungs. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They worked fast. Oxygen, compressions, epinephrine, but nothing slowed the blood loss. Melissa never regained consciousness. At 10:37 a.m., she was pronounced dead. The official cause, exsanguination from a severed femoral artery. Drone footage later confirmed the shark was a bull shark, one of the largest recorded in Southern California in years. Nearly 11 feet long, likely displaced by warmer waters or confused by shifting feeding patterns. The beach was closed for 48 hours. Scientists called it unusual but not unheard of. The ocean, it seemed, was changing. Jake disappeared from the surf scene, not in a dramatic way, he just didn't come back. The website for his surf school went offline within the week. The boards he used for instruction were never claimed from the beach rental shack. He didn't give interviews, didn't post on social media. Some said he moved north, others said he took a job inland far from the water, but no one really knew. After a while, people stopped asking. Melissa didn't come looking for a thrill, she came searching for peace, a quiet return to something she had lost. But the ocean doesn't care why you enter. August 19, 2018 was warm and windless along Australia's northern coast. The sun hung low over Byron Bay, casting long shadows across the empty shoreline where red warning flags flapped idly in the breeze. A lifeguard truck sat locked behind the gates of a closed beach access road, and beyond it, clear signage read, "Beach closed. Shark sightings reported. No swimming." The warning had been in place for days, issued after multiple drone patrols recorded a large great white patrolling just offshore. But late that afternoon, 5 teenagers ducked under the gate and made their way down the sand, laughing, filming, and ignoring everything they'd been told. 17-year-old Liam Norwick had planned the moment all week. He wasn't a thrill seeker in the traditional sense. He didn't skydive or surf, but he lived for the kind of content that turned heads on social media. His friends called him the main character, partly in jest, partly because Liam leaned into it. At school, he was the one narrating lunchtime stories with perfect comedic timing. Online, he'd film fake stunts, reaction videos, and clips of himself getting chased by public security guards. He wanted attention, and that afternoon he had a plan to get footage of himself swimming past the closed zone buoys, throw in some muscle flexing and jokes, and maybe go viral for pushing the rules. The group set up their phones in the sand just beyond the flagged zone. Liam stripped off his shirt, grinned for the camera, and waded into the surf with exaggerated flexes and mock bravado. He shouted something about not being scared of fish before diving through a shallow wave and surfacing a few yards out. One phone zoomed in, another captured behind-the-scenes commentary. None of them noticed the ripple near the second buoy. A few moments later, the water behind Liam exploded in a violent splash. His scream was sharp and short-lived, loud enough to startle the group into silence. Then he vanished. What no one had seen just beneath the surface was the strike of a great white shark. These apex predators are ambush hunters capable of reaching over 15 feet in length and weighing upwards of 2,000 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 4,000 pounds per square inch, enough to sever limbs or split a seal in two. In murky coastal waters like those near Byron Bay, they hunt by silhouette, tracking prey from below and launching upward with devastating speed. Drone footage from earlier that week had confirmed one patrolling the area, and the beach had been closed for a reason. It was a known hunting corridor, made even more dangerous by the splash, motion, and noise of a lone swimmer breaking the surface. At first, Liam's friends thought he was playing. The camera kept rolling, but when he didn't resurface, his closest friend sprinted into the water, yelling his name. What he found was a cloud of blood spreading in slow spirals and a strip of fabric, part of Liam's board shorts floating on the surface. Panic broke out. One boy ran toward the access road to get a signal and call for help. Another collapsed on the beach, screaming into his hands. Phones were dropped, voices cracked, and the laughter that had filled the air just minutes before was gone. Paramedics arrived 30 minutes later, but there was nothing left to do. The boys had pulled Liam back toward shore, but he had already lost too much blood. His leg had been severed at the hip. The great white had bitten once and vanished. Textbook behavior for a large shark mistaking prey. The medical report later confirmed what responders already knew. Liam had bled out within minutes of the attack. The location matched drone footage from earlier that week, confirming the presence of the same shark that had triggered the original beach closure. Despite the warnings, despite the signs, he jumped in anyway. Video from the day circulated briefly before being taken down. It wasn't graphic, it showed Liam flexing, swimming, laughing. But it captured the lead-up so clearly that investigators used it to piece together the timeline. Interviews with the group revealed the pattern. They knew the beach was closed, they thought the warning was overblown, and they never imagined something could go so wrong so quickly. The attack reignited national debate about digital culture, teenage risk-taking, and the growing trend of dangerous stunts staged for social media clout. A memorial was held at Liam's high school gymnasium the following Friday. Hundreds attended. Students, teachers, local families. His parents didn't speak, but his younger brother read from a list of things Liam had planned to do. Study abroad, start a clothing brand, get a tattoo their mom wouldn't approve of. Friends described him as funny, loyal, full of energy, and always looking for the next big moment. There was no villain to prosecute. The beach had been closed, the warnings were obvious, and the shark had acted as nature intended. What made it harder to accept was how avoidable it all was. Liam didn't die because of bad luck, he died because he made a reckless choice, ignoring every posted sign and every recent report for the sake of a stunt. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a chain of impulsive decisions that ended exactly the way experts warn they can. And now, his story is told as a reminder of what happens when thrill wins out over sense. It was June 7th, 2015, and the beaches along Tampa Bay, Florida were packed with hundreds of weekend visitors seeking relief from the scorching summer heat. Clearwater Beach, known for its pristine white sand and crystal clear waters, had drawn over 500 people that Sunday afternoon. But what started as a perfect beach day would soon turn into one of Florida's most tragic shark encounters. Sarah Ann Peterson never imagined this would be her last family beach day. At 34, the dedicated elementary school teacher had built a beautiful life in Tampa Bay since moving from Minnesota 5 years earlier. Her classroom at Clearwater Elementary was famous for its marine life theme, reflecting her love for the ocean. Each Sunday, she'd pack elaborate picnics and spend hours with her 4 children at the beach, a tradition that helped them adjust after leaving their inland home. That morning had started like any other beach day. Sarah packed their usual supplies while her children, Jessica, 11 years old, twins Thomas and Tyler, 8 years old, and little Emily, 5 years old, bounced around the kitchen with excitement. Her husband Michael, a sales executive, was away in Seattle on business, but had promised to be back for next weekend's beach trip. It would be a promise he couldn't keep. The conditions that day were unusual. Recent heavy rains had caused the nearby river to dump massive amounts of fresh water and silt into the bay. Just 2 weeks earlier, a teenage surfer had been bitten by what experts identified as a bull shark less than a mile from this spot. The attack had prompted increased patrols, but the combination of weekend crowds and poor visibility made monitoring difficult. Bull sharks are among Florida's most dangerous coastal predators, particularly along the Gulf Coast where numerous rivers empty into the sea. Unlike other shark species, they possess unique biological adaptations allowing them to move freely between salt and fresh water. Their specialized kidneys can process both environments, enabling them to swim miles upstream into rivers and hunt in waters where most sharks cannot survive. Since 1882, Florida has recorded over 500 shark attacks, with bull sharks responsible for more shallow water incidents than any other species. By early afternoon, Sarah and her children had settled into their usual spot between two lifeguard towers. The twins were engaged in their weekly sandcastle competition, while Jessica read her book under the shade of their blue umbrella. The morning had been perfect, filled with laughter, swimming, and shell collecting. Emily, the youngest, had been particularly proud of finding an intact sand dollar. At 2:15 p.m., the tide was coming in strong. Sarah stood in knee-deep water with Emily, pointing out small fish darting around their feet. The water temperature had reached 82 degrees, unusually warm for early June. The other children remained on the beach, the twins still arguing over whose sandcastle tower was taller. The first sign of danger came when a school of mullet suddenly burst from the water's surface near Sarah and Emily. The water became eerily still, a phenomenon marine biologists call the calm before the strike. In that split second, Sarah's instincts as a mother overrode everything else. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed Emily and thrust her toward the shore. The 5-year-old landed in shallow water just as an 8-foot bull shark erupted from the depths, its massive claws clamping down on Sarah's lower body. The water around her instantly turned crimson. The peaceful Sunday afternoon erupted into chaos as beachgoers realized what was happening. The shark's initial strike was devastating. Sarah was thrown sideways as the predator shook her violently. Lifeguards James Martinez and Katie Collins raced into the water with their rescue boards, while hundreds of horrified beachgoers scrambled out. The Peterson children watched in terror as their mother fought for her life, Jessica instinctively pulling her younger siblings close. The shark released Sarah momentarily before attacking again, a behavior typical of bull sharks who often retreat briefly to assess their prey's condition. Unlike great whites that typically strike once and wait, bull sharks are known for their repeated aggressive attacks, a hunting strategy refined over millions of years. The predator circled back, this time grabbing Sarah's right leg with its powerful jaws capable of exerting over 1,300 pounds of pressure per square inch. The rescue attempt was as dangerous as it was desperate. Martinez reached Sarah first, grabbing her upper body, while Collins positioned her rescue board as a barrier between the victim and the circling shark. A third lifeguard, David Torres, joined them with an additional board, creating a protective triangle around Sarah. The bull shark, still aggressive, made several attempts to break their defensive formation. Only when all 3 lifeguards began striking the water surface with their boards did the predator finally retreat into the deeper water. Working quickly in the blood-filled water, the lifeguards managed to lift Sarah onto the rescue board. The journey back to shore was agonizing. They had to move swiftly while keeping her stable, knowing every second was critical. Other lifeguards had cleared a path through the crowd and prepared an emergency treatment area on the beach. By the time emergency services arrived, Sarah had lost a devastating amount of blood. Despite immediate medical attention on the beach and in the ambulance, Sarah Ann Peterson was pronounced dead en route to Tampa General Hospital. Her last words were asking about her children's safety. Michael Peterson was still in the air somewhere over Colorado when he received the news. He would later find his children at their Aunt Karen's house, huddled together, their beach towels still damp from a day that had started so perfectly and ended in tragedy. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing patterns that shook the Florida coastal community to its core. The bull shark attack on the teenage surfer 2 weeks earlier had been downplayed by local authorities as an isolated incident. The victim, 17-year-old Mark Thompson, had survived with severe leg injuries, but the attack should have triggered more extensive safety protocols. Local fishermen had repeatedly reported increasing shark activity near the river mouth, documenting over a dozen sightings in the weeks leading up to Sarah's death. What particularly horrified investigators and the public was the discovery of multiple ignored warnings. 3 different fishing charter operators had formerly reported aggressive bull shark behavior near the river mouth to the Marine Safety Office. They observed the sharks following their boats unusually close to shore, a behavior typically associated with territorial hunting patterns. These reports, filed between the first attack and Sarah's death, had been logged but not acted upon due to what officials later admitted was bureaucratic oversight. The beach safety protocols in place were found to be severely outdated. While red flags had been raised that day, there was no specific warning system for shark activity, despite Clearwater Beach's proximity to known bull shark hunting grounds. The combination of murky water conditions and the recent attack should have triggered an immediate water evacuation, according to marine safety experts who later reviewed the case. The bull shark was never caught. These predators can live up to 32 years, and their territorial nature often leads them back to successful hunting grounds. Sarah's death serves as a sobering reminder that some of the most dangerous predators lurk in the shallowest waters, taking unsuspecting victims to their final fate. July 15, 2023 began like any other summer day in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. The azure waters off the Red Sea sparkled under the morning sun, inviting tourists to escape the scorching 95-degree heat. The air was thick with salt and sunscreen, while the gentle lapping of waves against the shore provided a deceptively peaceful backdrop. Sharm el-Sheikh, a resort town nestled between the desert of the Sinai Peninsula and the Red Sea, had transformed from a small fishing village into Egypt's premier diving destination. Despite its pristine reputation, the area had witnessed several shark attacks in recent years, though none had prepared the resort for what was about to unfold. Eric Anderson, a 34-year-old software engineer from Stockholm, Sweden, had always been drawn to the sea. Growing up along Sweden's eastern coast, he developed a deep connection with water from an early age, spending summers sailing with his father in the Stockholm archipelago. His mother, a marine biologist, had instilled in him a deep respect for ocean life, though some would later say this respect had turned to complacency. After graduating from KTH Royal Institute of Technology, Eric's successful career at a prominent tech company allowed him to travel extensively, and he had visited over 20 countries for their marine experiences. The evening before the incident, Eric spent time at the hotel's beachfront bar, Waves and Wishes, sharing his diving experiences with other guests. When a diving instructor suggested he stick to guided tours in these waters, Eric dismissed the warning, citing his extensive experience swimming with various shark species since his early 20s. This trip to Egypt was meant to be a celebration of his recent promotion, a solo adventure before taking on new responsibilities at work. But the waters of the Red Sea held a predator that cared nothing for experience or confidence. Tiger sharks are among the most dangerous shark species in the world, second only to great whites in recorded attacks on humans. These powerful predators can grow up to 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,400 pounds. Known as garbage cans of the sea, tiger sharks are notorious for their indiscriminate feeding habits, with powerful jaws capable of crushing turtle shells and serrated teeth designed to tear through any prey. Their name comes from the dark stripes along their bodies, which fade as they age. Unlike many sharks, tiger sharks are known for their tenacity and willingness to approach shallow waters, making them particularly dangerous to beachgoers. Eric had arrived at the Sunrise Diamond Beach Resort 3 days earlier, quickly establishing himself as an enthusiastic swimmer. The hotel staff knew him as the tall Swede who was always first in the water, often swimming beyond the designated safe zones despite warnings. His confidence came from years of recreational diving and his strong athletic build. At 6'2" and 185 pounds, he considered himself more than capable of handling any aquatic situation. At 8:45 a.m., Eric entered the water for his morning swim. The beach was relatively quiet, with only a handful of early risers setting up their loungers. Ahmed Khalil, the 23-year-old lifeguard on duty, noticed Eric swimming past the safety buoys, but couldn't get his attention despite whistling several times. The sea was calm that morning with excellent visibility extending nearly 100 feet below the surface. At 9:01 a.m., Ahmed noticed something unusual. The usual schools of colorful fish that dotted the shallows had vanished. The water took on an unnatural stillness. 2 minutes later, a shadow moved beneath the surface, too large and too powerful to be anything but a shark. The tiger shark's dorsal fin briefly broke the surface, cutting through the water like a knife before disappearing again as it moved toward the unsuspecting swimmer. Eric, now approximately 500 feet from the beach, remained oblivious to the danger approaching from below. The tiger shark, estimated to be around 14 feet long, made its first pass beneath him, creating a sudden pressure change in the water. The initial strike came without warning. The shark's powerful jaws clamped onto Eric's left thigh with devastating force. Tiger sharks can exert up to 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch in their bite, nearly twice the force necessary to break bones. The water around Eric erupted in a crimson cloud as he called for help, his voice carrying across the now still morning air. The shark's attack was brutally efficient, demonstrating their characteristic bite and sever technique. The predator clamped down and shook its head violently, using its serrated teeth like a saw to tear through flesh and bone. For 3 minutes, Eric fought against the shark as it circled and struck repeatedly. Each attack targeted a different area: his legs, torso, and finally his right arm. The water around him turned dark red as other guests watched from the shore. Ahmed and another lifeguard, 27-year-old Mohammed Saeed, launched a rescue boat, but the distance and the shark's aggressive behavior made immediate rescue impossible. 52-year-old British tourist James Wheeler attempted to launch his kayak toward Eric but was restrained by hotel staff who recognized the futility of such an attempt. On the beach, tourists retreated as the attack continued while hotel staff cleared the water of remaining swimmers. At 9:08 a.m., Eric's movements began to slow from blood loss. The shark made one final devastating attack, pulling him under the surface. When his body resurfaced 30 seconds later, he was motionless, floating face down in the bloodied water. Emergency responders reached Eric at 9:12 a.m., but it was too late. The official cause of death was listed as extensive blood loss and massive trauma. The autopsy revealed over 32 distinct bite wounds, with the fatal injury being a bite that nearly severed his torso. The medical examiner noted that the pattern of wounds was consistent with tiger shark attacks, showing the characteristic saw-like tears from the shark's serrated teeth. The incident led to a temporary closure of several beaches in the area and renewed discussions about shark safety measures along Egypt's Red Sea coast. Local authorities implemented additional monitoring systems and increased patrol boats in the area. The Sunrise Diamond Beach Resort installed a new warning system and doubled their lifeguard staff. Despite these measures, tourism in Sharm el-Sheikh suffered a significant decline in the months following the attack, with beach attendance dropping by 40%. The aftermath of Eric's death sent shockwaves through his family. His parents, Lars and Maria Anderson, learned of their son's death while at their summer home in the Stockholm archipelago. Lars, a retired naval officer, immediately flew to Egypt to identify his son's body and handle the complicated process of international death arrangements. The Swedish embassy in Egypt worked closely with local authorities to expedite the repatriation of Eric's remains, a process that took 11 days due to Egyptian regulations and the extensive documentation required for deaths involving animal attacks. The tiger shark responsible for the attack was never found, though local authorities continue to monitor shark activity in the area more closely. The incident remains one of the most thoroughly documented shark attacks in Red Sea history, serving as a case study for marine safety experts and a sobering reminder of nature's raw power. July 12, 2014 dawned warm and bright over Port Douglas, Australia. The winter sun cast a golden glow over the coastline, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and eucalyptus through the air. Waves lapped lazily at the shore, their rhythmic murmur blending with the distant calls of seabirds. It was the kind of morning that invited families to the beach, promising nothing but calm waters and endless stretches of sand. Among those drawn to the coast that day was the Darug family, who had arrived after a 3-hour drive from Cairns, eager for a weekend of relaxation. At breakfast, 12-year-old Kira had been especially animated, talking about the marine life she hoped to see. She was enchanted by the ocean, hoping to spot sea stars in the tide pools, collect shimmering shells along the shore, and watch tiny fish dart between the waves. The water felt like a world of endless wonder, full of treasures waiting to be discovered. Kira Darug had always been fascinated by marine life. Born to Gerard Darug, a local high school biology teacher at Cairns State High School, and Akira Darug, a senior nurse in the emergency department at Cairns Hospital, Kira inherited her father's passion for science and her mother's caring nature. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of sea creatures, and she spent countless hours watching nature documentaries. She had recently won her school's science fair with a project about Great Barrier Reef conservation, and her teachers often remarked on her exceptional understanding of marine ecosystems. At 9:45 a.m., the Darugs arrived at 4 Mile Beach, claiming a spot near the northern end where the crowds were thinner. The temperature was a mild 75 degrees, typical for a winter morning in tropical Queensland. The family had been planning this trip for weeks, a celebration of Gerard's recent promotion to the head of the science department. Kira, wearing her favorite blue swimsuit with dolphin prints, could barely contain her excitement as she helped set up their beach shelter. Her younger brother Bindi, age 8, immediately began constructing an elaborate sandcastle system while their father arranged their picnic supplies. The water was unusually murky that morning, following 3 days of heavy rain that had washed away sediment from nearby rivers into the ocean. Such conditions created the perfect opportunity for an ambush predator, one that thrives in low visibility and shallow waters. Among the most feared of these hunters is the bull shark. Built for stealth and power, bull sharks take advantage of murky waters to strike unsuspecting prey with lethal precision. These formidable predators can grow up to 11.5 feet in length and weigh more than 500 pounds. Unlike most sharks, they have a remarkable ability to survive in both salt and fresh water, venturing far up rivers and into brackish environments. Their aggressive nature and tendency to prowl in areas where humans often swim have made them responsible for more attacks on people than almost any other shark species. At 10:19 a.m., the peaceful morning shattered. Kira had ventured about 30 feet from the shore, still well within the designated swimming area, when she spotted something struggling in the water ahead. A seabird, its wings pinned awkwardly against its body, bobbing weakly in the gentle surf. Even from a distance, she could see the thin tangle of fishing line wrapped around its legs and wings, leaving it half drowned, unable to fly. She swam toward it, arms cutting smoothly through the water. The bird thrashed at her approach, but exhaustion had taken its toll. She reached for it, hands carefully moving toward the tangled line. A bull shark had been circling below, its attention locked onto the struggling bird. Injured prey was an easy meal, and the predator had been waiting for the right moment to strike. But before it could, another figure entered its territory, moving with purpose, disrupting the pattern of the hunt. The shark, opportunistic by nature, redirected its focus. Without warning, the water around Kira erupted. The 8-foot bull shark struck from below, its powerful jaws clamping onto her right leg with devastating force. The initial bite, delivering 1,250 pounds per square inch of pressure, shattered her femur instantly and severed major arteries. The impact knocked her sideways, and before she could react, the shark thrashed violently, dragging her underwater. For several agonizing seconds, she disappeared beneath the surface, the water above turning dark with blood. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the shark released her, its instincts satisfied by the damage already done. Kira surfaced, her body limp, face pale, her hands still partially outstretched toward the bird, which had managed to free itself in the chaos. David Cooper, a 42-year-old off-duty lifeguard with 15 years of experience, was jogging along the beach when he heard the commotion. Panicked screams, the unmistakable churn of something thrashing in the water. He sprinted toward the shoreline where Jara Darug was already moving through the surf toward his daughter. Together they plunged into the bloodied water. The shark circled back, its massive dorsal fin cutting through the surface as it made a second pass. Cooper moved between the predator and Kira while Jara pulled her toward shore. The water around them had turned crimson, spreading rapidly. Once on the sand, Jara applied pressure to Kira's leg, working to slow the bleeding. Her skin was cool, her breathing shallow. A bystander had already called for emergency services, and by 10:25 a.m., paramedics Mark Stevens and Julie Wong arrived on scene. They assessed her condition. Hypovolemic shock, a weak and thready pulse, extensive tissue damage extending from her nearly severed right leg to her hip. Despite the severity of her injuries, Kira remained conscious as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. A rescue helicopter landed directly on the beach at 10:43 a.m. During the 8-minute flight to Canes Hospital, Kira received 4 units of blood as paramedics fought to keep her alive. A trauma team led by Dr. Richard Barnes was waiting in the emergency department, where Kira was immediately rushed into surgery. For 16 grueling hours, medical teams worked in shifts to save Kira's life. The initial surgery lasted 7 hours as doctors attempted to repair the massive trauma to her leg. The shark's serrated teeth had caused extensive damage to her muscle tissue, and the force of the bite had shattered her femur into multiple fragments. Despite multiple blood transfusions and the doctor's best efforts, infection began setting in, leading to severe sepsis. At 2:17 a.m. on July 13th, Kira Darug's heart stopped for the final time. The medical team attempted resuscitation for 23 minutes before pronouncing her dead. Her parents, who had maintained their vigil outside the operating room, were devastated. Jara, who had spent his career saving lives, now found himself helpless in the face of his own daughter's loss. His wife collapsed against him, her silent sobs shaking them both as the weight of the moment settled in. In her final moments, Kira's small hand clung weakly to her father's as he whispered reassurance she was too tired to answer. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath shallow as the world around her faded. Her parents would always remember the way she looked that day, so full of life in the morning sun, laughing as she ran toward the waves, never imagining that it would be the last time. The tragedy sent ripples through the community. 4 Mile Beach, once a place of carefree enjoyment, became a site of cautious remembrance. Authorities increased shark monitoring and installed new warning systems aiming to prevent another loss like Kira's. Local surfers and swimmers spoke in hushed voices of the girl who had loved the sea and had, in the end, been claimed by it. Today, a small plaque stands near the spot where Kira took her final swim. Worn by salt and wind, its message remains clear, a solemn reminder that the ocean, for all its beauty, is still untamed. It was February 15th, 2011, a gray, rain-drenched day along the New South Wales coastline. Bondi Beach, known for its wide white sands and easy surf, was strangely quiet. The rain had started before dawn and hadn't let up since. A light mist clung to the air, muting the sea into a dull smear of green-gray. Normally, this beach welcomes over 2 million people a year, but that day it was nearly empty. A single red flag flapped on the lifeguard tower, signaling rough water and poor visibility. No one paid much attention. Shark sightings around Bondi were rare, and fatal attacks were rarer still, only a few scattered across decades. Statistically speaking, the odds were slim, but statistics don't matter when the water turns red. The group that arrived that afternoon weren't locals. They were 21-year-old American exchange students studying abroad at the University of Sydney. 5 of them: Blake Harrison, Derek Collins, Alicia Ramirez, Tasha Williams, and Marcus Rowe. They had become fast friends in just 6 weeks. Blake, a confident, sun-bleached business major from California, had planned the trip. He was the kind of person who treated beach days like rituals. Flip-flops, frisbee, cold drinks, and jokes that never landed but were always loud. The others were more subdued. Derek was a thoughtful pre-med student from Boston. Alicia was athletic and pragmatic, her environmental science coursework always seeping into conversation. Tasha filmed everything like she was producing a travel blog. And Marcus, quiet, perceptive, kind, never asked to be the center of attention. He just showed up for the people who needed him. They arrived around 2:30 p.m., the sky still spitting rain. The beach was damp and empty, the lot holding only 2 other vehicles. Waves rolled in, steady and wind-churned. A single red warning flag had been raised early that morning, and a lifeguard in a yellow slicker sat perched high in the tower, scanning the water. The group made jokes about having the whole beach to themselves, as if they were getting away with something. But while they were focused on the sky above, none of them thought to wonder what was moving through the water below. They unpacked quickly, tarp, speaker, cooler, and spread out as if they owned the beach. Tasha started filming, narrating with a mock British accent as she introduced their group to the camera. 5 Americans claiming Bondi Beach in the middle of a rainstorm. They laughed, they posed. But beneath the surface, just beyond the breakers, something stirred. The rain clouded the water, but it hadn't driven everything away. Blake laughed off the conditions. They weren't going out far, he said. Just a swim to shake off midterm stress. Something to break up the rainy monotony. No one expected anything unusual, but the water that day held more than current and rain. They spread out a waterproof tarp 100 yards from the tower, weighed it down with backpacks, and cracked open a cooler. For nearly an hour, they played a half-hearted game of frisbee, ate pre-made sandwiches, and passed a speaker around. Tasha filmed short clips for her Instagram story, narrating dramatically in a fake accent. "And here we are," she said, 5 Americans conquering Bondi Beach in the rain. Marcus mostly observed. He was always like that. Quiet, a step behind, but never out of sync. He offered a running commentary of jokes just low enough for only Alicia to hear, which made her laugh even harder. Despite the gray skies and drizzle, there was a real sense of ease between them. The kind of day that, had it ended differently, would have felt golden in memory. At 3:45 p.m., Blake suggested they swim. Tasha declined, preferring to stay dry and watch the bags. The others followed Blake to the shoreline. The water was warm, about 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and the surf was messy but manageable, waves curling at 3 feet high. As they entered, a lifeguard jogged over and warned them to stay within the flags and not go deeper than their chests. Rip currents were active and visibility was poor. They nodded, promising to be cautious. Within minutes, they were waist-deep, laughing and dunking each other. They body surfed clumsily through broken waves, yelled over the wind, and let the current tug at their feet. It felt harmless. It felt fun. No one noticed the subtle pull of the tide, the small drifts that separated them. They didn't notice the distance stretching behind them. Little by little, the group drifted apart. Derek and Alicia stayed closer to shore. Blake and Marcus, both confident swimmers, ventured farther out, eager to catch cleaner waves past the first break. They didn't notice how far they'd gone. From the beach, they were now just 2 heads bobbing in a slate-colored horizon. The rain blurred their outlines. The sea was no longer shallow and familiar. It had become wide, open, and unknowable. At 4:16 p.m., Marcus felt something brush his leg, just a bump. He turned expecting to see Blake, but instead the water exploded. A great white shark, 15 feet long, nearly 2,000 pounds, rose from below in a vertical burst. Its jaws locked onto Marcus's lower body, tearing through flesh and bone in a single brutal motion. The impact lifted Marcus out of the water, his arms flailing as a red spray followed him upward. The shark didn't just bite, it clamped down and shook him violently, as if testing the limits of what it could destroy. Marcus screamed, a raw, panicked sound that carried all the way to shore. Blood fanned out in wide crimson arcs, turning the water cloudy in seconds. Blake was just 6 feet away. He froze. 1 heartbeat, 2, he stared at Marcus, at the gaping jaws, at the thrashing limbs. Then instinct took over. He dove arms out, kicking furiously toward the horror unfolding beside him. But the water was murky now, brown and red and thick. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't find his friend. On shore, Tasha screamed. Alicia and Derek were already swimming back, shouting for help. Lifeguards leapt into action. One launched a jet ski while another grabbed a rescue board and paddled fast into the break. Blake surfaced again, gasping. The shark was gone, so was Marcus. For a moment, the sea went still, just bubbles and a spreading stain. Then a pale form floated into view, face down, 30 feet away. The jet ski reached Marcus first. His body was limp, his legs were mangled below the knee. Lifeguards hoisted him onto the sled and began CPR as they gunned it back toward the sand. Blake was pulled onto the rescue board by a lifeguard who urged him to hold on. By the time they hit shore, a crowd had formed despite the rain. Beachgoers and tourists stood frozen as CPR continued. Paramedics arrived at 4:28 p.m. IV lines were started, blood was administered. At 4:37 p.m., a helicopter from Royal North Shore Hospital landed on the sand. Marcus was airlifted within minutes. At 5:03 p.m., he was declared dead in transit. He never regained consciousness. His cause of death? Exsanguination and massive trauma. The aftermath rippled. Bondi Beach was closed for 3 days. Aerial drones and helicopters scoured the coastline. The shark was never seen again. June 15, 2013 was the kind of Florida evening that felt like it could last forever. On a stretch of beach near Marathon in the Florida Keys, college students gathered around a fire pit, the air thick with salt, smoke, and cheap beer. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker half buried in the sand. Laughter came easy. The stars were bright, it was a summer break. And for Amber Keplar, 21, this was exactly the kind of night she lived for. But some waters, no matter how calm they seem, are never safe to step into, especially when the sun goes down. Amber had driven down from Tallahassee with 3 friends to celebrate the end of finals. She was loud in the best way, with sun-bleached hair, chipped nail polish, and a tendency to burst into song when no one expected it. A journalism major with a part-time waitressing job, she wasn't the type to play it safe. She was the type who jumped in without checking the water. Just before midnight, with most of the group winding down or passed out in camp chairs, Amber and her closest friend Lizzie, still buzzed from drinks and glowing with that carefree recklessness unique to 20-somethings on vacation, decided to skinny dip. It wasn't a dare, it wasn't planned. They just looked at each other, grinned, and ran for the surf, peeling off clothes and tossing them behind as they laughed their way down the sand. Locals had long avoided that particular inlet after dark, not because of tides or currents, but because the nearby dockside fish cleaning stations leaked into the shallows, drawing predators close. But sharks especially were known to patrol the warm coastal waters at night, hunting in silence just beyond the moonlit foam. Bull sharks are among the few large shark species that actively hunt in shallow coastal waters, and at night they become even more dangerous. With poor light to navigate by, they rely on vibration and movement, zeroing in on splashes that mimic struggling fish or injured prey. Unlike great whites that stalk from the deep, bull sharks patrol close to shore, sometimes in less than 3 feet of water. They're territorial, quick to react, and bold enough to strike without hesitation. For swimmers unaware or careless, the line between safe and fatal can disappear in seconds. The two girls waded in waist deep, their laughter echoing into the dark. Amber splashed ahead, arms raised, spinning as she fell backward into the water. Her friend stayed closer to shore, shivering from the sudden chill and hesitating from the sudden quiet. Then Amber screamed. It wasn't drawn out, it was sharp, immediate, and followed by thrashing so violent it sent water spraying in all directions. Lizzie turned in time to see Amber's leg disappear beneath the surface. Then her entire body dragged several feet into the deeper channel. She surfaced once, eyes wide, gasping, but the water around her was already tinted with blood. Lizzie swam back to shore in a panic, screaming for help. A few others ran toward the surf, confused, still half drunk. One tried to wade in, but the water was clouded and opaque, the tide pushing against him with eerie calm. Someone called 911 from a cell phone held aloft with shaking hands. Amber washed up 12 minutes later, pulled in by the tide. She was barely conscious, her leg torn open from thigh to knee, her body in shock. Paramedics arrived less than 10 minutes after that, but by then she had lost too much blood. CPR was attempted on the sand, lights flashing against pale faces and glass bottles, but her pulse never returned. She was declared dead at the scene. Officials identified the bite pattern as consistent with a bull shark, likely an adult male, drawn to the noise and motion in a shallow feeding zone. No search for the shark was initiated. The beach was temporarily closed and additional warning signs were installed along the access path. Local anglers had reported frequent shark presence for weeks prior, but without a specific threat, no formal action had been taken. Amber's friends packed up the next morning and drove home in silence. Her family held a small memorial at a marina near their home in Clearwater, where she'd grown up learning to swim, dive, and push boundaries just enough to keep life interesting. She was remembered for her laugh, her boldness, and her habit of diving in without always checking how deep the water was. The beach reopened, the fire pit was cleaned, the tide rolled on like nothing had happened. But for the people who were there that night, it wasn't the shark they remembered, it was the decision, one that never should have been made. July 16, 2016 was heavy and hot off the coast of Key West, Florida. The air sat thick over the ocean, turning the sea surface into a glassy mirror that reflected the moonlight in long, broken strips. A private catamaran floated quietly just beyond the reef line, anchored in a feeding channel known to local captains as a place to avoid after dark. Here, in the deeper cuts between sandbars and limestone shelves, the tides pushed baitfish through narrow passages, bringing larger predators with them. Beneath the calm surface, the current churned with activity, and above, on the deck of a rented party boat, no one was thinking about what swam below. Tyler Grimshaw was 27 and restless, the kind of person who always needed movement. He worked odd jobs around Tampa, construction, seasonal landscaping, sometimes delivery driving, but rarely stayed in one role for long. He liked people, attention, and adventure, especially the kind that involved pushing limits. His friends called him fearless. Others might have called him impulsive. He was athletic, outgoing, and known for taking risks that made everyone nervous but usually ended in laughter. He didn't have a death wish, he just didn't believe anything bad would happen. The boat had been rented to celebrate a friend's birthday with nearly 20 guests on board. As night fell, music played from a small speaker, red plastic cups lined the railing, and the catamaran glowed under deck lights that cut sharp edges across the water. It was meant to be a night of drinking and dancing beneath the stars. Most of the guests stayed close to the center of the boat, barefoot and relaxed, enjoying the breeze and the open air. Tyler, however, wasn't the type to stay on the sidelines. He'd been drinking heavily for hours, bouncing between groups, louder and more animated with each passing hour. The waters around Key West are rich with marine life, but certain deep channels beyond the reef are known danger zones, transition points between shallow flats and deeper hunting grounds where predators thrive. Few are more suited to these murky, brackish waters than the bull shark, large, territorial, and highly aggressive. Unlike great whites or tiger sharks, bull sharks can tolerate fresh water and hunt with precision in low visibility. Measuring up to 11 feet and weighing over 500 pounds, they strike with over 1,300 pounds of bite force. Fast, relentless, and easily triggered by the splash and thrash of a human in the dark. Just before 10 p.m., Tyler climbed up onto the guardrail, arms wide, and dove headfirst into the dark. The music kept playing. A few people laughed, others panicked. The water swallowed him in an instant, and for a few moments he was visible, treading water, backstroking, calling out as he swam just beyond the reach of the deck lights. People shouted for him to come back. Some moved toward the edge of the boat, trying to spot him in the dark. But Tyler kept swimming deeper into the shadows. Then something changed. A sharp splash echoed from the far side of the boat, followed by a single sharp cry. It was short, abrupt, and loud enough to make the music seem suddenly distant. When the spotlight swept the water, Tyler was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no flailing limbs, no second scream. Just a swirl in the water and a torn piece of fabric that floated up seconds later. One of Tyler's friends, sober enough to act, grabbed a phone and called the Coast Guard. On deck, the captain pulled the boat away from the spreading blood as guests shouted Tyler's name into the dark, scanning the waves with flashlights. No one jumped in. The water was too black, too still. For nearly 20 minutes they searched, circling the deck, tossing life rings, sweeping the surface with spotlights. But Tyler was gone. Rescue boats launched from shore with helicopters overhead within the hour. Divers entered before dawn using floodlights and sonar to comb the seabed. The crew gave detailed statements about the timing and location, but by the next afternoon, only a sneaker and a torn strip of shirt had been found. Blood in the water confirmed what officials already suspected. Tyler had likely been taken by a bull shark, drawn to the sound and thrashing in a known feeding corridor. His body was never recovered. The shark was never identified or pursued. Tyler's death stunned his family and friends. A memorial was held in Tampa that weekend, with a collage of photos displayed near a folded t-shirt and an untouched drink from the party that never ended. The service was quiet. Some were angry, most were just bewildered. Tyler had always seemed invincible until he wasn't. The reality was hard to ignore. He made a reckless choice, diving into predator-filled waters at night while drunk, ignoring every warning from the people around him. It was 1951 and Corfu Island, a jewel of the Ionian Sea, still bore the charm of a quieter, less crowded time. The scent of saltwater clung to the air as tourists basked in the warm Mediterranean sun, unaware of the looming dangers hidden beneath the turquoise waters. Corfu had become known for its sparkling blue beaches, catamaran rides, and picturesque landscapes. The island's main industry was tourism, though it was far from the bustling hotspot it would later become. To locals like Vanda Puris, it was simply home, a place where the beauty of the land was woven into everyday life. Vanda had grown up amidst the familiar sights of rolling farmlands and the rhythmic sounds of the sea. Her world had always been sparkling beaches and the scent of ripe oranges, thanks to her family's small holding where they grew oranges. As the daughter of a humble farmer, her weekends were spent working the land. When Vanda turned 16 earlier that week, her parents, recognizing how hard she worked, gave her a rare treat: spending money and a weekend off to enjoy with her friends. They believed she would be at the beach with her girlfriends, as girls her age often did, but Vanda had other plans. Instead of meeting her friends at the crowded tourist beaches, Vanda was with George Athanasenas, a handsome senior from school. For the past 2 months, the two had been secretly courting, their relationship growing in quiet moments. Vanda had been swept away by George's charm, but she had kept their relationship a secret from her deeply religious Orthodox Christian father, knowing he would never approve. George wasn't just any boy, he was the one everyone admired, but he had eyes only for Vanda. She was smart, kind, and captivating to him. Though he hadn't said it yet, George already planned to marry her someday. That day, George insisted on paying for everything. He bought them sodas for their journey, and the two of them set off toward a secluded alcove that George knew well, an outcrop far from the crowds of tourists that usually flocked to the more popular beaches. They thought they were alone, but when they arrived, the beach was far from empty. A pair of wrinkled German retirees were soaking up the sun, a couple with 3 young children were splashing in the shallow waters, and a lone man drifted lazily in a small canoe. It wasn't the solitude they had hoped for, but they shrugged it off and headed into the water. They waded in together, the cool sea lapping at their legs as they swam out, far enough that their feet could no longer touch the ground. It was here, chest deep in the water, that the two of them found their peace. The world and its distractions seemed far away. They talked and laughed, their voices mingling with the gentle splashing of the waves. Vanda told George about her dream of studying nursing after school. She wondered aloud if her parents could afford to send her to medical school. George listened intently, nodding along, his attention fully on her. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the world was theirs alone. But then, something changed. George's eyes flicked to the horizon, his body tensing. He had seen something. He grabbed Vanda's arm, instinctively pulling her toward him. Vanda turned sharply, ready to question his actions, but George was already laughing, embarrassed by his overreaction. He pointed out at the water, dismissing it as nothing more than a dolphin. He had seen them plenty of times while out on his father's fishing boat. He shook his head, trying to brush off the instinctual fear, but Vanda was already intrigued, drawn in by the thought of dolphins so close. With excitement in her eyes, Vanda turned toward the open sea, scanning the waterline for any sign of the playful creatures. But it wasn't dolphins that she saw. The dark shape was far too large, moving too slowly, and far too ominous. It was a great white shark. The shark, nearly 18 feet long, had been skimming the waters for hours, unnoticed by the beachgoers. The children had already left the water, but now, as if responding to a change in its surroundings, it moved closer, circling George and Vanda with precision. Its movements were smooth and deliberate, blending with the ripples, making it nearly impossible to detect. It had already passed by the area where the children had been playing and was now closing in on the two swimmers. The water shifted around them as the creature moved. George noted the change and told Vanda they should head back to shore, uncertain of what was nearby. At that moment, a Coast Guard vessel appeared in the alcove, its presence altering the scene. The crew had seen the disturbance from afar and moved in to assist. Vanda, still expecting to see dolphins, agreed and started for the shore, unaware of what was approaching. The shark, sensing movement, decided it was time to strike. It had been circling for too long, waiting for the right moment to attack. As Vanda swam, her head down in a freestyle stroke, the shark surged forward, its massive body rising from the depths. In an instant, the water around her seemed to boil as the creature lunged. Vanda never saw it coming. Her head and shoulders were swallowed whole by the shark's gaping maw. The force of the bite was so powerful, so final, that it severed her cleanly in half just below the rib cage. The water turned crimson as the shark's jaw snapped shut, inhaling the upper half of her body. George's eyes widened in horror as he saw her disappear. He flung himself toward her, grabbing the legs that were all that remained. He tried to pull her back, but it was too late. In his hands, he held only her severed legs. The water around them bloomed with blood, and bits of her entrails drifted away on the current. The shark was far from done. Before George could grasp the magnitude of the loss, the shark struck him with the force of an aquatic cannonball. The impact sent him tumbling through the water, his ribs cracking under the blow as sharp pain radiated through his chest. But the predator wasn't after George, it had one last thing to claim: Vanda. As the beast knocked him off balance, George lost his grip on her remains and was pulled under by the current, disoriented and gasping for air. Suddenly, George felt something grab him by the hair. He flailed wildly, but it wasn't the shark. It was Mr. Peroni, the captain of the Coast Guard vessel. The crew had seen the chaos unfolding and raced to the scene, their eyes scanning the bloody water for any signs of life. Peroni's hand, grim and sure, clutched the only thing moving in the water: George's dark hair. With one powerful tug, the captain hauled George aboard the vessel. The boy was in a state of shock, his ribs shattered, his body battered. But the horror of what he had witnessed had broken him more than his injuries ever could. He was barely conscious as the crew rushed him to the hospital. But George would never be the same. Vanda, meanwhile, was gone. The ocean had claimed her with such speed that no one had even seen it coming. Her body was nothing but scattered fragments, torn and consumed by the creature that had lurked in the deep. The only remains were a small piece of intestine floating lazily on the surface of the water, a grim reminder of the girl who had been there just moments before. Following the incident, the Coast Guard scoured the waters, scanning for any sign of the predator. They caught a brief glimpse of a single fin cutting through the waves before it disappeared into the depths. The shark was gone, its hunger momentarily sated. In the days that followed, George was a broken shell. His ribs healed, but his mind couldn't forget the image of Vanda disappearing beneath the surface. He was sedated for much of the time, his grief too raw to comprehend. Back in the coastal town, Mr. Pieris, Vanda's father, was notified of the shark attack and called to the hospital as her next of kin. He arrived to check on George, who was admitted with 4 broken ribs and severe shock. Mr. Pieris had secretly known about the relationship between Vanda and George, but had hoped for the chance to meet them together as a couple. With her death, that opportunity was lost forever. Mr. Pieris sat silently by George's bedside, his heart heavy with grief. When George was well enough, he wheeled him to the memorial at the church, though there was no body to bury. Vanda had been claimed by the sea, and all that remained was the sorrow of a community mourning its loss. March 14, 2015 was clear and windless along the rugged coastline of Duker Point, just south of Cape Town. The Atlantic shimmered with deceptive calm, lapping gently against the base of towering cliffs that had become a magnet for thrill seekers. The waves slapped rhythmically against the rocks, birds wheeled overhead, and on top of the cliff a group of university students stood barefoot in the sun, daring each other toward the edge. They weren't tourists, they were locals. They knew the coast, knew the rumors, and knew that below them the water churned with currents colder and deeper than it looked. But that afternoon, they didn't care. The plan was simple: cliff diving. No wetsuits, no gear, just a quick plunge into the open ocean and a scramble back onto the rocks. Among them was 22-year-old Jordan Macefield, tall, athletic, and the kind of extrovert people naturally followed. Jordan had always leaned into risk. He was the one who suggested Duker Point in the first place. The area had a reputation known for its dramatic rock faces and deep entry points. It offered one of the few spots where you could jump from over 30 feet into the ocean without hitting reef or sand. But it also carried another much darker reputation. The nearby rocks were home to a seal colony, dozens of slick barking bodies that sunbathed on the shoreline and slipped like shadows into the water. And where there are seals in the Cape, there are great white sharks. The group knew this. Signs had been posted a year earlier after multiple shark sightings, warning against swimming or diving in the area. Local rangers had updated the advisory list just 2 days before, noting increased predatory activity in the shallows. But by the time Jordan and his friends arrived that morning, the surf was low, the cliffs were dry, and the temptation was stronger than the caution. One by one, the group began to jump. Jordan was last. He raised his arm, shouted something no one quite heard, and hurled himself off the ledge. He hit the water cleanly and surfaced a moment later, grinning and throwing his fist in the air. The others cheered from above. But then, without warning, something massive surged from below. There was no splash, no warning fin, just a violent jolt that pulled Jordan backward under the surface as if a rope had been yanked from the deep. A few seconds passed, then the water near the jump site turned red. Great white sharks are deeply woven into the marine ecosystem of South Africa's Western Cape. Dierker Point, just south of Cape Town, lies along the edge of what's known as the Shark Alley Corridor, where cold Benguela currents meet rich breeding grounds for seals, tuna, and other prey. Here, great whites don't migrate through, they stay. Scientists have tracked the same individuals returning year after year, using coastal shelves and sea colonies as ambush points. Their hunting relies on stealth. They strike upward, fast and silent, using the contrast of sunlight on the surface to target silhouettes. In areas like this, where rocky outcrops host hundreds of seals, and human activity overlaps with feeding zones, a splash in the wrong place can look exactly like a kill trigger. Jordan had leapt into the center of their territory. At first, the group thought it was a prank. Jordan was known for stunts, and the sudden disappearance looked staged. But when he didn't resurface and when a second cloud of blood appeared, darker and whiter than the first, the mood shifted. Screaming erupted. One of the students tried to climb down the cliff toward the shoreline while another ran for cell reception. A third called emergency services as the rest stared helplessly at the calm surface where their friend had vanished just seconds earlier. Rescue teams arrived within the hour. The National Sea Rescue Institute launched a search using boats, divers, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the coastline for hours. No body was ever found. A single torn swim fin was recovered near the edge of the seal rocks. But beyond that, there was nothing. Officials confirmed that shark activity had been recorded in the area days earlier and reiterated that Dierker Point had never been a sanctioned diving location. A temporary restriction was issued, and signs were reposted with more prominent warnings. Jordan's University held a memorial later that week. Flowers, stories, and a worn photo of him mid-jump on a hiking trip, suspended in the air with his arms wide open. Friends remembered him as fearless, impulsive, and always chasing the next thrill. But even those closest to him admitted he pushed too far. He saw the warnings and jumped anyway. It was July 18th, 2015 off the coast of Florida, the kind of summer day that seemed endless. The Gulf of Mexico gleamed under a flawless sky, the surface still and brilliant, reflecting the sun like a mirror. For the Calloway family and their guests, the St. Jameses, this was meant to be the start of a perfect weekend, one filled with luxury, salt air, and memories captured against the backdrop of the open sea. Their yacht was named Coastal Serenity, an 85-foot Sunseeker Manhattan worth nearly $1 million. It featured 4 staterooms, leather interiors, twin jet skis, and a custom diving platform built into the stern. James Calloway, a real estate developer who had made his fortune transforming coastal land into luxury properties, considered the yacht a symbol of everything he had achieved. The boat was his retreat, his trophy, his escape from the deadlines and deals that defined his days. Owning a yacht wasn't just indulgence, it was proof of arrival. On board with James were his wife Eleanor, their 2 teenage children Madison and Tyler, and their friends Mark and Lisa St. James, along with their kids Michael and Lyra. The group had launched from their private dock in Naples early that morning. By midday, they'd reached a quiet cove 12 miles offshore known for calm waters and excellent visibility. The anchor dropped into 80-foot deep water and the yacht settled gently into place. The surface around them was almost unnaturally calm. Lunch was served on the aft deck. A chef had prepared grilled fish, tropical fruit, and icy drinks. Laughter rose from the table. The adults relaxed in the shade while the teenagers stretched out along the rails, talking and scrolling through their phones. A pod of dolphins passed in the distance, drawing a round of cheers and excited pointing. Everything felt cinematic, framed by light and ease. The entire scene played out like a postcard, a little too perfect, almost scripted. Lyra Calloway, 19, was quiet but never withdrawn. She had just finished her first year at Northwestern, where she was studying marine biology. Lyra had always been drawn to the water. It was where she felt most alive, most focused. She volunteered at aquariums, read about marine ecosystems, and often sketched sea life in the margins of her notebooks. She was observant and kind, someone who listened more than she spoke. She had not expected to be invited on a luxury yacht, but when Madison, her college roommate, extended the offer, Lyra had accepted without hesitation. This wasn't just a getaway, it was a glimpse into a life far removed from her own, and it was a chance to be closer to the ocean she loved. The teens changed into their swimsuits after lunch and headed toward the stern, excited to swim. The water was warm at 82 degrees and the visibility extended nearly 30 feet below. The custom diving platform gleamed under the sun. Madison jumped first, followed by Tyler, who made a dramatic splash. Michael stayed back with a waterproof camcorder filming the action. Lyra hesitated only briefly, then stepped onto the ledge and dove cleanly into the sea. She didn't perform or pose, just slipped below the surface like she belonged there. For the next 10 minutes, they rotated between climbing, jumping, and swimming just beyond the yacht. The water was crystal clear, the kind that felt impossible to leave. Fish darted around their ankles, the sun burned high overhead, glittering off the chop. The adults remained on deck, drinks in hand, occasionally glancing toward the water. The sea rocked gently, and there was a stillness to the air that almost felt too perfect. Nothing seemed wrong, nothing gave away what was just below them. The first impact came without warning. A deep thud struck the yacht's port side. Glasses tipped over and chairs shifted. For a moment, no one knew what had happened. Captain Rodriguez checked the control panel and confirmed they were anchored above 65 feet of open water. There were no reefs, no sandbars, just the ocean. A second, more powerful strike hit the stern. This time, the yacht lurched. The platform groaned as it shifted against the bolts. Tyler, who had been climbing the ladder, slipped and splashed backward into the sea. The sound echoed across the deck. Everyone turned toward the rear of the yacht. Then the fin surfaced. It was massive, slicing through the water in a wide arc. Beneath it, a dark shape moved with deliberate force. What emerged next was unmistakable: a great white shark, later estimated to be 18 feet long and nearly 4,000 pounds. It had been circling beneath them, likely drawn by the engine vibrations or erratic patterns of swimmers splashing just feet from the hull. Lyra was already swimming toward Tyler. He had drifted slightly from the others after his fall, and she reached him quickly, urging him toward the ladder. Michael climbed out of the water. Madison was halfway up. The rest of the group shouted from the deck, panic spreading across their faces. The shark circled once, then rammed the diving platform a third time. The strike was violent. A 3-foot gash opened below the waterline. Alarms rang from the control panel as seawater began to rush into the engine bay. Lyra and Tyler were still in the water. The shark passed under Tyler again, its rough skin slicing abrasions across his side. Then it turned sharply. It wasn't interested in him, its focus shifted. It closed in on Lyra. The force of the strike lifted her halfway out of the water. Blood erupted across the surface as she was pulled beneath in a sudden surge. For several seconds, there was nothing. No movement, no color, just silence. James dove in immediately. He swam hard toward the spot where Lyra had vanished. The water was darker now, cloudy with blood and bubbles. Then, somehow, she surfaced. She surfaced on her back, barely conscious, her leg torn open below the thigh. Tissue shredded, the joint limp, blood streaming in thick, pulsing clouds. Her body shook in small involuntary jerks, eyes half closed, lips parting in shallow, panicked gasps. She wasn't screaming, she didn't have the strength. They were just 15 feet from the ladder when the shark returned. It came in low, from beneath and behind, its massive body a shadow against the deep. With terrifying precision, it struck upward, ripping Lyra from James' grasp in a single brutal surge. The water detonated in a spray of blood and foam as she vanished beneath the surface. James dove immediately, heart pounding, lungs burning. But the sea had turned opaque, thick with blood and churn. He couldn't see anything, only the echo of thrashing, then silence. By the time he surfaced, gasping, the ocean had gone still again. The shark had disappeared into deeper water, retreating the way large predators often do after a kill, silent, efficient, and unseen. For a moment, there was nothing but the gentle lap of waves against the hull. Then, in the distance, something bobbed to the surface. Pale, motionless, a single arm drifting in the swell. The Coast Guard arrived 18 minutes after Rodriguez's flare. A rescue team located Lyra's body nearly a mile away. She had washed up on a stretch of sand, face down in the surf, her hair tangled in seaweed and her body torn in multiple places. She had been carried by the current, but not far enough to disappear. James was hospitalized with deep lacerations across his torso and arms. He received 87 stitches. Tyler, though physically unharmed beyond surface wounds, was unable to speak for days. At some point, the recording had stopped. No one asked to see the footage. That night, Michael took the camcorder from the table, removed the tape, and walked outside. He dropped it into the fire pit and left before the flames had fully caught. No one asked about it. The footage was never mentioned again. The yacht was hauled back to shore for repairs. The structural damage was extensive, but it was never restored. James sold it quietly within 3 months. Neither he nor Eleanor ever returned to the water. Marine biologists confirmed the attacker as a female great white. Some speculated the shark had been disoriented by shifting currents or driven closer to shore by warming waters. Others believed the vibrations of the anchored yacht might have triggered a territorial reaction. No one could say with certainty what caused the aggression. Thanks for watching this compilation. Looking for more? Click on the next video right now.